Slavery and the oppression of African Americans has impacted their present-day lives by creating psychological barriers. The limited opportunities for success in the world result in poverty, which leads to drugs, unemployment, gang violence, and mass incarceration.
So to understand, you asked me what's the impact on slavery on African Americans today? Poverty. I think as far as the impact on poverty, you have to look at education, you have to look at economics. Because of slavery, we have long-range effects, such as ownership of resources. Now, we know during the times of slavery, there was a grab for resources, and we know that slaves didn't own any resources. And since the ownership of resources is generational and passed down, you have some people that have been enriched over the generations because of what their ancestors inherited what they passed down. Now, slaves traditionally, their ancestors had no property to pass down. So, of course, that put them in a spot that's sort of hard to get out of. So it's difficult to get out of slavery when you have no resources, or to get out of poverty when you have no resources, compared to those who started with resources. It's almost like a race or a relay race, or just say a 100-yard dash. When you're starting 20 yards behind the starting line, it's sort of hard to catch up. In fact, you almost never catch up. So slavery is like putting us 20 yards behind the starting line in a 100-yard dash, and that's the impact slavery's had. It's given us a challenge. Hard to catch up. Some of us can never catch up. Now, if it were a longer race, of course, we could probably make up some of that ground. Now, some say that's an excuse. But again, it's difficult to dig out of a hole you didn't put yourself in.
Around the early 1600s, African people were exploited and seized from their native lands, taking with them clothing, traditions, and customs that would be later incorporated into American lifestyle. As slaves were imported from the western coast of Africa, they were transported to the Northern American colonies, as well as the Caribbean islands to commence intensive labor. Their height, weight, teeth, and richness of skin color was assessed in auction to determine whether they would be more suitable as a house or field slave. The slaves were subjected to inhumane treatment and oftentimes raped by their masters. The children born from rape were not claimed by their fathers and did not receive special treatment due to their mixed race. They were forced to commit their lives to being another man's property. Countless hours of work in the hot beating sun was a catalyst to many health problems, not to mention their diet was subpar. But they knew to stay sane, they could only take it day by day. To express their sorrows and optimism for a more positive future, they sang songs with hidden messages.
By the end of the 19th century, many African Americans still lived in former slave states. African Americans were focused on breaking out of oppression, but white political leaders and regular citizens segregated the areas where African Americans lived. Many blacks tried moving to states in the North to look for an equal opportunity, but life was just as bad as it was in the South. Slavery depleted African Americans of owning anything.
In the late 1900s, Boston was one of the most segregated cities in the North. There were large amounts of residential segregation. All of the blacks were concentrated into one area. All of this segregation denied African Americans access to good jobs and to the opportunity to leave the ghetto. The future only led to a dead end.
The end of the Civil War was a struggle for African Americans. Southern legislatures became the enemies of blacks. Many states like Mississippi, Florida, South Carolina, and Alabama basically prohibited African Americans from doing anything but working on the fields. Although the 13th Amendment was passed and African Americans gained their freedom, many states passed extreme, cruel laws. These were called the Black Codes. The goal was slavery in disguise. They constrained, controlled, and restricted the lives of African Americans. These states made it illegal to buy or rent land. They stripped African Americans of their most basic rights.
How has slavery affected the position of African Americans today?
Greatly.
And what I mean by greatly is that if we had all started at the same point in America, I don't think that some blacks or most blacks would be in the predicament that they find themselves today. And what I mean by predicament, lack of land, lack of resources, monies, those type of things. Most Europeans who came here had a distinct advantage as well as the privilege of white skin. May I go on? Mm-hmm. No, so the bottom line is I think now, I don't think that some of these kids know their history. That's one part, but the other aspect of it is they start off behind, if you know what I mean. That is that their parents and those parents before them don't have the resources or have a legacy of land or capital, money to leave behind for their children and those children.
During the Civil Rights Movement, Martin Luther King and other reformers regarded poverty as a civil rights battle. The fight for poverty was a bit overshadowed because of other larger issues, but the Poor People's Campaign was a movement created to fight against the poverty of African Americans. President Lyndon B. Johnson also created a movement called the War on Poverty, which was created to help all impoverished people. At this time, in 1959, 55% of African Americans were under the poverty line. Martin Luther King once said,
"There is a problem of underemployment, and there are thousands and thousands, I would say millions of people in the Negro community who are poverty-stricken, not because they are not working, but because they receive wages so low that they cannot begin to function in the mainstream of the economic life of our nation. Most of the poverty-stricken people of America are persons who are working every day, and they end up getting part-time wages for full-time work." Today, a large population of the African American people live in deplorable conditions, and New Haven is no exception. There are many areas of this diverse city that are densely populated by poor African Americans in low-income housing properties. Many of those places are surrounded by violence and drug trafficking. Throughout the course of creating this documentary, Nyla and I traveled to those areas to gather footage. A few days after, there was breaking news of a deadly shooting in a place we visited. This occurrence shocked us and reinforced the idea of how prevalent the issues are.
we talked to one woman and asked her what were her views on poverty.
Nobody should be in poverty and everything. And I feel as though that a lot of politicians should stop spending money in the wrong places, and a lot of these organizations that's supposed to help the people don't even help them.
For this project, we wanted to explain through patterns of continuity and change how slavery has caused mental and physical barriers for the African American community. This idea is reinforced with every generation, and it is looming over the shoulders of many African Americans. Every generation knows about slavery, and the legacy of it is directly connected to African Americans being lower, having unequal opportunities, and just overall being inferior. It creates a way of thinking that almost traps you. As Bob Marley says, emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds.